That was why. So indeed, I'm a professor of neurosurgery here, but probably more germane to tonight's conversation is I'm the chairman of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, which in fact, interestingly enough, the Dalai Lama is the founding benefactor of that work. And this is a center that examines the neuroscience of those behaviors and the value proposition of practicing those behaviors with intention because of the effects ultimately on your physiology. And so the conversation tonight is why be kind? This is the antithesis of Donald Trump's conversation. I'm hoping he's listening, but I don't think he is. So, interestingly enough, one of the challenges of modern life is the fact that we were never designed for modern life. And in fact, fundamentally, our DNA has not significantly changed for the last 200,000 years. So we, in fact, are the same individuals who were on the savannah in Africa fighting for our lives. And if you look at our evolution as a species and those processes that turned us into humans, which are the development of our cortex, which allowed us to have something called theory of mind and recognize that there are people whose thoughts are independent of our own, to have complex language and abstract thinking. The result of those resulted in several things: a prolonged gestational period, a decrease in litter size, and the absolute requirement that our offspring are taken care of by us for what, 10, 15, for some of us in this room, 30 years? And this is at a very expensive cost, right? I mean, really, the mother especially gets nothing for all this energy expenditure for caring for our offspring, yet it is an absolute requirement for our species to survive. So to motivate us to care for our offspring, we have developed and are hardwired for, I will tell you, to care and to nurture, or if you will, to be kind. Yet, what is it then that is that motivator to make us be kind? Some of you have probably heard of this hormone called the love hormone, is a term for it, or the nurturing hormone, which is oxytocin. But in fact, there are other neural pathways that use dopamine and other neurotransmitters for nurturing. And what happens, I'm going to take off my shoes. Has anybody seen the Dalai Lama talk? Has anybody ever watched it? He'll be sitting there and like he'll take off his shoes. He'll just be sitting there picking at his toe or something. And everybody's in rapture going, the Dalai Lama, the guy's picking his toes. But that's probably not as bizarre as Louis XIV sitting on his toilet having audiences with people while he's... But anyway, that's a side note. Keep those thoughts in mind. So, where were we? So the inside of us are these pathways that make us want to care, if you will. And what is our reward for caring? If we look at brain metabolism, when people are kind, or compassionate, if you will, when they respond to another's pain, which is what compassion is, the desire to intervene when someone sees somebody suffering, those neural pathways that light up or have increased metabolism are the same ones that are associated with rewards for such as money, or how your certain parts of your brain increase when you have sex. I'm sure none of you guys have noticed pleasure from sex, probably, right? God. Or food, as we were talking about exercise. Now, speaking of an interesting fact, actually, when you practice compassion and kindness with intention, it actually has more physiologic benefit to you than being at your ideal body weight or exercise. Now, can you imagine? I mean, it's extraordinary. So, imagine, and what's also further extraordinary is we have this medical, industrial, pharmaceutical complex, right, that spends billions of dollars, and what percent of our GDP is spent on that? A huge amount of our GDP. Yet the three things I just mentioned to you would decrease 80% of healthcare costs throughout the world, right? Just those three things. Now, of course, then that's what's the core of the problem then? Behavior change, which is, of course, the hardest thing to regulate. But getting back to my talk, I'll just go off here. This is all because I've been operating all the time, so I'm just free-flowing here. So anyway, those same areas that are associated with pleasure are hardwired to us. When we serve or care for others and nurture, then those same areas light up in our brain and make us happy, make us fulfilled, make us feel pleasure. And in fact, it's even involuntary. There are studies that have been done. As an example, when they have set up science research projects where they have given individuals money to give to charity, that when those individuals voluntarily give to a charitable cause, those same reward or pleasure centers light up. But in certain circumstances, when they don't have a choice and the money they have is given, they light up just as bright as if they made the decision to give the money themselves. That's how powerful it is on our physiology when we see or sense that someone is being kind or a kind act is being performed. And in fact, we know, and I'm sure all of you have experienced, when you see a person walk into a room and you're, let's say, having a meeting, what happens when that person smiles at you, looks you in the eye, leans into you, acts interested, you relax, you calm down, you have a sense of openness, you have a sense of trust, you have a sense that you're being cared for. And what happens when somebody is sort of a twit and walks in, oftentimes a boss? What happens when a person who is insensitive or not particularly nice walks into a room, and this is the type of person who interacts with people like this all the time? You sit there like this, you don't want to talk, you're worried about what your response is going to be. And this is an example, and science has shown this, that when an individual acts with this openness and this type of style of behavior, it has a huge impact on those around them. In fact, it's like a rippling effect. And in fact, there are a number of studies that show when an individual demonstrates kindness, it results in other people being kind, threefold beyond. Okay? So it has a huge, huge impact. But how does this impact your physiology? How many of you are familiar with mindfulness meditation? It's everywhere, isn't it? We're calling it McMindfulness now. Well, the thing about mindfulness, which is wonderful, and which is transformative for many people, is that it allows you to have attention, it allows you to have focus, it allows you to have non-judgmental awareness. The attention and focus allows oftentimes type A individuals to be more efficient, and non-judgmental awareness, or being present, allows individuals not to have an emotional response that affects their peripheral physiology, and as a result, you get some positive physiologic effects. because many of us have a negative dialogue going on in our head, right? We're hypercritical, especially in the West. The difference between a mindfulness practice, if you will, and incorporating a compassion practice into that is that there are many instances where type A people especially, or people who are prone to narcissism, actually these mindfulness practices only accentuate those types of behavior. This is why I make an argument oftentimes that while mindfulness can be wonderful and we can actually teach people how to control their physiology through that, it's an inward journey that you take by yourself. And where I'm going with this is that compassion, which fundamentally is what defines our humanity and gives us meaning in our lives, can only be done as an outward journey of connection. Because every one of us, at the end of our days, what do we want? We want to have a sense that our presence here had meaning, that the people who have cared for us or we have cared for will remember us, and that we have had a positive impact in the world. And when you have a sense that your actions that you take give you that, this is when things really change. So let me explain. When you act in those manner, with those intentions, there are a couple parts of our evolutionary baggage, and we all species have evolutionary baggage, that you control much better. How many are aware of our reptilian brain? You've all heard that, right? Of course. And that is part of our brain which has been, and this is if you believe in evolution, otherwise you may believe that we've only been around 6,000 years and we're sleeping with dinosaurs. Anyway, that part of our brain is one that responds to threat. And remember, I said our DNA is such that we have not changed our DNA for 200,000 years. So our brain and our reptilian response and our response to threat is the same as way back then. And we are very attuned to threat. And in the modern world, that threat is all these different things that are happening around us. Because back 200,000 years ago, you were really able, looking at one thing, and that was whether the grass is moving, there's a line there. You're not looking at that, checking your emails, waiting for a phone call, right? And having to be somewhere in 5 minutes, okay? So what happens is when you have this threat, there are two parts of your autonomic nervous system. One is called the sympathetic nervous system, and that is the one associated with the flight, fight, or freeze response. And the other is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is associated with calmness, inclusion, connection. So when you have this sense of threat, it shuts down or downregulates or decreases the tone of the parasympathetic nervous system and has a huge increase in the sympathetic nervous system tone, which then results in the release of a variety of hormones that in the short term are wonderful. They result in your heart beating faster and beating more powerful, your vessels constricting and the blood being diverted to your muscles, your pupils dilating so you can see better, and it allows you, if there is a line in the grass, for you to run up a tree, and if you survive, you come right back to normal physiologic state. If you don't, it doesn't really matter. So, but the other side of this is that in modern society, those types of stress responses, which are, I was just describing, oftentimes their sympathetic tone is increased at a low level, and this is where we have a horrible health effects as a result. When you have the chronic release of cortisol, when you have the low-level release of a variety of these other stress hormones, your body was never meant to have that. And this leads to, as an example, significant stress on your heart, and there's something called heart rate variability, and as a result, it's one of the leading causes, or a lack of heart rate variability, which is one of the leading causes of sudden cardiac death. It has a huge effect on your peripheral vascular system and leads to stroke. It leads to increase in elevation in your blood pressure. It suppresses your immune system. So it has a horrible negative physiology effect. But let me tell you though, what has a positive physiologic effect? It's decreasing that stress. And how do you decrease that stress? It is through being kind and compassionate. Let me give you the results of the study. It was a group of people over the age of 65 women. Why it was women, I don't know, but typically they're nicer than men, in my limited experience. So, in this context, this group of individuals had two options. One was they volunteered for a certain period of time, weekly, to be of service to those in a hospital. The other group did not. They were a control group. And guess what happened? After the study went on for a period, and it was followed for years, the people who volunteered a minimum amount of time had a 2x increase in longevity, simply because they were being of service and caring for another person. Because that is our default mode, and that fundamentally, physiologically, is where we function best. And it is when we have this sympathetic nervous system tone increased that we start having problems. The other problem oftentimes that we have, which is also more evolutionary baggage, is that when we feel threatened, we have a tendency not to be open, but to be closed-minded. And that's why oftentimes you see people hanging out with people who look like them, act like them, sort of sit in the same reverberation chamber, who agree with them. And it's because they feel safe there. And remember, until 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, our primary survival strategy was as hunter-gatherers in groups of 10 to 50, 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, right? And it was absolutely critical that when you saw someone who was suffering or in need, first of all, you immediately attuned to that, and you were highly motivated to assist them and care. Because if you did not, what happened? It put your group at risk and potentially did not allow for your group to survive. And we do have this, unfortunately, when we are scared and fearful, and people can manipulate this, as you can see with some of our political candidates, we have a tendency to pull in, we have a tendency to hang out with people who look and act like us because we're scared. So having openness, having caring, trying to overcome this evolutionary baggage is possible. And in fact, you can do it with training, with intention, and it can lead you to have all the positive physiologic effects that I have been describing. The other aspect of this, which I just mentioned to you, and it was kind enough Piero to mention this book, have any of you have heard of adverse childhood experience? So adverse childhood experience is what happens. It's typically associated with poverty, often associated with dysfunctional households. And it creates a situation of toxic stress for children. And when children are in that situation, it affects their ability to focus and function in school. It affects their health, and ultimately affects their longevity, and is associated with significant increases in crime and other negative types of behavior. And this is also true for children who have not bonded. They have a huge higher incidence of chronic disease, decreased longevity. What this book is about is my own experience in part, intertwined with neuroscience and contemplative practice, which tells you individuals how to overcome this. I actually grew up in poverty. My father was an alcoholic. Neither of my parents went to college. We were on public assistance. My mother was an invalid, had a seizure disorder, tried to commit suicide multiple times, evicted from homes, father in jail. And it was the fundamental meeting of a woman at age 12 who taught me a practice that allowed me to understand this and actually develop a practice that allowed me to be compassionate, have an open heart, and care. And that fundamental interaction and that training by that woman is what has allowed me to succeed in life. And we here at Stanford have developed a compassion cultivation training program that we train individuals to suppress the negative parts of our evolutionary baggage so that you can receive the benefits, the positive physiologic benefits that I've described to you, not only to improve your health and wellness, but to fundamentally give you a view of how to develop the greatest meaning in your life. So I would encourage you to check out our website. It's ccare.stanford.edu. And please go buy my book immediately. It's called Into the Magic Shop, A Neurosurgeon's Quest to Discover the Secrets of the Brain, or the Mysteries of the Brain and the Secrets of the Heart. There's a website called intothemagicshop.com. It's received actually extraordinary endorsements from the Dalai Lama, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, Thich Nhat Hanh. Do you guys know Amma, the hugging guru? Amma, Sogo Rinpoche, Arianna Huffington, Deepak Chopra, and all those other types of people. But it is an inspiring book, and hopefully you will have an opportunity to see it because it outlines a path to give meaning in your life. So thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and I hope to see all of you maybe at one of our events. Thank you.